Thanks so much for doing this interview for Reader's Digest, Lee.
Oh, it's a real pleasure. Love that magazine.
It was wonderful hearing you say that you had a history with Reader's Digest with your grandma.
Yeah, my grandma had a subscription, and every time we'd go up and visit, every few months, I would read through all her back issues. And, you learn a lot from that magazine. And then when I moved to the States, the first place we lived was pretty close to the World HQ of Reader's Digest, and I was invited over there a couple of times.
Oh, fantastic.
And because the Reader's Digest condensed editions have done me so much good as a kind of teaser or taster for people.
Yeah.
Brought me a lot of readers that way.
And we're actually going to be releasing one of your books in the condensed edition
Yeah,
as well, which is very
I hope
exciting.
so. Yeah, that's great.
So tell us a little bit about where you were born and raised and the impact that that's had on your writing.
Well, I was born in Coventry, England, which was famously bombed, in 1940, and the city centre destroyed. We left there when I was 4.5, but I can still remember the devastation. And even though I'm not that old, my first memories are probably 12 years after the war.
Right.
It was still wrecked, and we would play, as kids, we would play in bombed out houses and stuff. I mean, now it would be impossible, but everybody'd be worried about safety and so on, but we had a great time. And then we moved to Birmingham, and that's where I really grew up. And Birmingham was a manufacturing city. That was the key to it. It was a place where people made things. And that totally informed my life in a lot of ways, in that you just get on with the work, you make your product, and you do it with skill and pride, but you make no fuss, no fuss, no drama. It was that kind of a place.
Right.
And I think that was very influential on me, to be honest, in the sense of just get the work done. Don't be a prima donna, just,
We're certainly not that.
Yeah.
And you say that you didn't dream of being an author, and you studied to be a lawyer, but you never practiced.
Yeah, the lawyer thing, the law degree was completely accidental.
Right.
I was, don't forget, this was early 1970s when youngsters were just having the greatest time. And I finished high school, and then I immediately went on a long European hitchhiking trip with a bunch of friends. And I got back eventually late in September. And I thought, maybe I should go to university. And I was way too late for the official applications procedure. So I just picked one, more or less at random, and gave them a call on the phone and said, I'd like to come. Do you have any vacancies? And they said, well, what do you want to study? And I said, I don't know. What have you got? And they said, we have a vacancy in the law department.
Oh,
and
wow.
I thought, yeah, I can do that. And it was actually a brilliant degree to do if you do not want to be a lawyer. If you want to be a lawyer, then you're all worried about how well are you doing? Are you in the top of the class and so on?
Yeah.
If you don't, you can ignore the parts that are boring. You can just study the parts that are interesting. And it really does set you up for life. You are instantly out of date because the law changes continuously.
Yeah.
So the day after you graduate, you're out of date, but the principles stay with you. And it's a really great thing to carry through life. You sort of know what is true or not. You sort of know what people can get away with and what they can't.
Yeah.
And if you've got any kind of dispute with anybody, you sort of sense how to win, or is it worth it, and all that kind of thing. So I really thoroughly recommend, even if you don't want to be a lawyer, everybody should do a law degree. It's a really useful thing.
I was interested that you didn't create a legal drama. Like, you created Jack Reacher's. Why did you decide not to?
Well, partly
focus on
because, it's about, in your business, let's say the magazine business, if you were going to start a new magazine, you wouldn't deliberately do what everybody else is doing. And there were some great legal thrillers around at the time. There was Scott Turow, there was John Grisham. So why compete with those people? I wanted to do something that was different and distinctive. I thought that would give me a better chance of finding an audience.
Well, you certainly did that.
Yeah, happily.
So I saw that you said that you wanted to be a Beatle when you were a child. Like,
Yeah.
what else did you sort of dream about doing?
Well, I mean, I just fell in love with the Beatles from the beginning for the joy and the optimism. Because England was, post-war England lasted a very long time. you know, it was still basically the same feeling right into the early 60s. And to be honest, for a kid, it was dull. It was very boring. It was a gray, austere kind of feeling. And worse than that for us, for a little kid, the overwhelming sense was that history was over. The huge achievement was in the past. And I can't argue with that. You know, Britain's experience in World War II was intense and very traumatic. And winning World War II was a huge achievement. And it felt like everything was in the past. There was nothing ahead. There was nothing for us. And then the Beatles came along with all that joy and optimism, and it felt, yes, there is something for us. You know, this is great. And I loved the joy in the audience, you know, the passion in the audience, and the obvious joy in the performers. And I just fell in love with the idea of doing something, anything that could create such joy in the consumer. And unfortunately, the plan with being in the Beatles had three problems. I was only 9 years old. They had no vacancies, and I had no musical talent. But the proposition was what I wanted, the idea that I could do something that other people would enjoy. And so I had to match my skills to what I could do, and it was backstage work at first, backstage in the theatre, and then television, and then writing. But to me, it's all the same thing, you know. It's somebody doing something that the audience is going to love, whether it's for 5 minutes for a pop song, or whether it's for 2 hours for a play or a TV show. And now, you know, we're writing the books. I think some people read them real quick. Some people take 2 or 3 days, or maybe a week. And the idea that you're doing something that gives somebody else happiness is irresistible to me.
Yeah. So I heard that Paul McCartney has discussed song lyrics with you. Tell us about that.
Well, I contribute to various charities and so on, and one of them, mostly animal charities, because I feel, you know, animals deserve a fair break if possible, and so does he. And we met at a charity ball, and I was a hopeless fanboy, you know. I was just like, and it's hard for him. I mean, I'm fascinated by his life, because he's been one of the most famous people on the planet for virtually all his life. And what must that be like? And it's difficult for him. And so we talked, but it wasn't really all that interesting, because he's very guarded, because he's utterly aware that anything he ever says is going to be reported and maybe twisted and taken out of context, which I'm learning now, actually, that you know, you can't say anything without it going straight on the internet, and there's a million comments about it and so on. Yeah.
So talking about that, like you're sort of the hot topic on the internet at the moment, talking about what's happening with Jack Reacher and Tom Cruise not going on to do the television series?
Yeah, well, I love Tom Cruise. I think he's a great actor, and he's certainly a great guy. We've had a lot of fun, and you know, there's a lot of nonsense about him in the press that just isn't true from what I've seen. He's just a regular guy, very hardworking.
Yeah,
we had a lot of fun, and I loved the first 2 movies. I thought they were terrific. But ultimately, the readers felt he was not an accurate representation of Reacher. And I've got to defer to the readers. You know, the readers are the most important people to me.
And why was that? What were they saying?
Well, he's too small. You know, Reacher is a huge, hulking, scary brute. If Reacher walks in the room, the temperature just drops a degree, and people are a little, you know, worried. A huge, physically intimidating man. And the readers felt that Tom was not really communicating that. And so, like I say, my loyalty has to be, even though I love Tom as an actor and as a person, my loyalty ultimately has to be with the reader. And so we are not going to do any more movies with Tom Cruise. We're going to take it to binge-watching television.
Great.
Long seasons for each book, and a different actor.
And how are you going to choose the actor?
Well, I mean, I would love to see a complete unknown, and I would also love the readers to be involved. You know, they were dissatisfied with the first choice, so now let them be involved in the second go-round, the reboot. Let's have them participate, maybe suggest people, maybe vote on a short list or something.
Well, they already are.
Oh, well, that's great.
Yeah.
I'm on the road, so I'm not really paying attention to what's going on, but I'm sure that there must be a lot of suggestions by now.
Yeah, there are a lot of people suggesting themselves.
Well, that's fine too. I would love an unknown, and if they're good enough, why not?
Yeah. And I mean, your life has been such an amazing second act. You know, it's just amazing. Like, it's so inspirational. Like, what's been the most surprising aspect of life after 40 for you?
Well, I mean, clearly this whole second career, which, and I really feel, I'm glad if it's an inspiration to people. I'm really glad about that, because lots of people find themselves in the situation that I was, where, you know, you faithfully, loyally, you work for somebody, and then you get kicked out, and that feels awful. I completely, you know, it's horrible. You're 40 years old. You feel desperate. What are you going to do?
You had a young child, didn't you, at that stage?
Yeah, we had a kid, and we had all the stuff, you know, a mortgage and car loan and all that kind of thing. What are you going to do? So it's a very miserable situation, but it's also, if you step back a pace, it's also quite an inspiring opportunity, because when you're 40, you've been working for about half your career, and you've picked up skills and habits and discipline. You're not the wastrel you were when you were 20. You're a different person, and maybe you can use what you've learned to move forward. And so in a way, it's a great opportunity. It's probably the last time you can make a really radical change to your life. So I played a sort of psychological trick on myself, because the chances actually of succeeding as a popular writer are very small. But I just thought, well, obviously it'll work. You know, I was fooling myself in a very positive way. And it did work for me, and it can work for lots of people. And I think people should not feel bad if they lose their job and have to do something else. It is your last chance to do what you really want to do. And I think actually lots of people make the most of that opportunity.
And why do you think it was such a huge success for you? Because your first novel just went gangbusters. You know.
Yeah, I think that there were two fundamental reasons. One was that I had to take it seriously. You know, this wasn't like a hobby.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like a vague desire.
Yeah.
It had to work, because I was out of work. I was broke. It had to succeed. That was number one. And the other thing is, I think, just about me. It's not that, and I'm not falsely modest about it. I can write. I can write well.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah.
But apart from that, I'm a completely ordinary person. So that I'm just a normal guy. And so whatever is in my head, whatever is what I want, lots of other people want it too. And therefore, because I can write, I can communicate with huge numbers of people, because I am them. It's that simple.
So when do you think it's the best time to start writing a novel, if you're going to?
Honestly, I think, just wait. And I find this very hard, actually. If you're asked to talk at a university or something like that, and you've got all these 20-year-olds who want to be writers, you can't really tell them, because it's a very discouraging answer, to just read for 20 years and then do it. They don't want to hear that, because, you know, they want to do it right now. But honestly, I think writing is not only something that you can do later in life, it's something that you should wait until later in life, until the gas tank is full, until you've seen things, until you know things, until you've got something to say, basically.
So I hear you're a voracious reader, and obviously at Reader's Digest we love books. You know, why do you think it's so important for people to read?
Because there is something fundamentally very different about reading than any other form of entertainment. If you are watching a movie or watching television or listening to music, intellectually you're just sitting there and it's coming at you. It's washing over you. With books, it's, you know, a book has these strange black marks on white paper. And what happens is I put them down, and then months later or years later or even decades later, maybe when the writer is dead, a reader scans their eye across these strange black marks, and in their head a story appears that is very similar to the story that the writer intended, but it's in the reader's head. The reader is doing the work, literally. The reader is burning their mental energy.
Yeah.
The reader is burning their calories.
Yeah.
The reader is creating the story. So it is a creative thing for the reader.
Yeah.
You're not just passively consuming something. You're interrogating the text. You are creating the story just as much as the writer is. And that's a very fundamentally different relationship than any other form of entertainment. It's actually sort of custom made for you because you're going to interpret things the way you want to, and it feels like you're inventing the story, which is active rather than passive. And it does make a huge difference, I think, to your investment in the story and certainly your enjoyment of the story.
And what do you do to relax when you're working so hard? Like,
Gosh.
do you love to read?
Oh, I love to read, yeah.
Relax.
And, reading is actually part of my, it's sort of part of the whole process. It definitely is. You can't write unless you're a big reader. And so I read all the time, literally. I probably read 300 books a year,
Oh, wow.
simply because I love it. So that's my main activity. And then my second main activity for relaxing would be music. Love listening to music. And then my third would be watching television or something.
So what kind of books, music and TV?
Oh, any
some
book,
of it?
any book. I mean, I just love picking up a book at random. I've read some weird books. Read a book about the history of air conditioning.
That is weird.
I read a book called Geometric Patterns in Medieval English Brickwork.
Wow.
I just love knowing stuff, finding stuff out.
Yeah.
And of course, there are great novels in my genre. I'm very lucky to be at the top of the poll, but I have to work like crazy because there's a tsunami of talent coming after me. There are some wonderful new writers, especially women. This is the thing that I think is another thing that's amazing about writing, is that actually not only is it a level playing field for men and women, but actually women are better than men. There are
Why?
I don't know. Is it historically because they have to work a little bit harder, the disadvantage that women feel in the marketplace? Is it better imagination? I don't know what it is, but especially in my genre, women are great. And, look at the most successful writer of all time, J.K. Rowling, woman. It's a woman's medium.
Do you have a favourite writer?
I got a lot of favorite writers. I mean, probably if you really push me, I would say my favorite writer of all time is William Styron, who, passed away a while ago, and it was very representative of that previous generation of really serious novelists. And in a way, I regret that generation has passed. Another favorite of mine was E.L. Doctorow, who luckily I got to know in the last 10 years of his life. And that is a generation that we may not see again somehow. I'm not sure that the so-called literary writers have got that same kind of substance anymore than that they used to have. And I miss that, those big, thick, substantial books that we used to get 30, 40 years ago.
And what have been some of the most surreal and amazing moments in your career? Like, Bill Clinton interviewed you recently.
Well, that
must have been like...
Well, that was... Bill is, he loves to read too. He's a huge reader, and he's very Catholic in his tastes. He loves crime fiction and thrillers. And he's always read my books, and he sends a handwritten note, usually, saying what he thinks of the book. And
what does he say?
He just loves what Reacher gets up to and all
Right.
that kind of thing. And it was surreal that he would interview me on stage because the first 4 books that I wrote and the first 3 years that I lived in America, he was the president. And now he's sitting where you are, interviewing me on stage. It was completely surreal.
Wow.
Yeah.
What other kind of things like that?
Oh, there's you get to meet other politicians I've met. I met Obama like 4 times,
Wow.
and other novelists, serious heavyweight novelists and intellectuals, and all this kind of stuff. And at the other end of the scale, you meet regular people, and some of those stories are really, really touching. There's something about Reacher that brings together daughters and fathers.
Oh, that's lovely.
It is lovely.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of letters from women who say that they've somehow been able to forge a better relationship with their dad because they read the books together and then talk about them. And then there's the really, really sad ones where you get, sadly, because my career's gone on a long time now, you get letters that says, my dad loved your books and he got sick and it got us through the chemotherapy or whatever,
Oh, wow.
or readings together and things like that.
That's lovely.
And you get messages like, really sad, but what can you do? Like somebody will write and say, my dad is dying and he's desperate for the next book.
Oh.
So I send them an early copy.
Oh, that's so sweet.
It is. And then, a month or so later, I get another letter saying he read it and then he passed away.
Wow.
And to feel that you've somehow made a difference to somebody's life like that
That's lovely.
is a lovely thing.
Yeah. Who do you think your most unusual, celebrity fan is that surprised you?
I think Henry Winkler is a fan, who played the Fonz.
Great. You look a bit like the Fonz in your leather jacket.
Yeah, that was that's and Gene Hackman. I met Gene Hackman the other night. He came along to an event. And I'm their fan. They shouldn't be my fan.
Yeah. Do you watch Happy Days when you were
Oh
growing
yeah,
up?
of course. It was. We ran it on television when I worked in
Oh, you
that
did?
business. Oh yeah.
And that when you're working, if someone walked into your office while you're writing, what would they see if they were sort of looking as a voyeur?
They would see my office is. I try and keep it clean and organised, but as I get deeper into the book, it's usually chaos. And they would see the back of my head, and I'd either be typing with two fingers, because that's the only typing I can do, or more likely, actually, I'd be leaning back in the chair, scratching my head, trying to think, what is the next bit?
So going on that, what routines do you have when you're writing? Because I hear that you don't make a plan about what you're going to write.
No, I never make a plan or an outline. I used to have a routine where, when the first time I got a computer, it had a game on it called Minesweeper, and I would make myself do the expert level in a certain number of seconds before I would start a day's work, and that was a sort of ritual that somehow rinsed my mind clean, and I would be ready to go. And my computer now doesn't have that on, so I have to do without it. So I don't really have that many rituals, apart from I always start writing on the 1st of September, because that is when I started to write the very first book, 1st of September.
Killing Floor
Yeah.
in 1997.
Yeah, it came out in 97. I actually started it 1st of September 1994.
Oh, okay.
And because you finish it, I had it finished by halfway through 1995, and then it sold to a publisher, and it takes a little while to filter through the system. So it was early in 97 that it finally came out.
And do you have a book or a movie that's had a huge impact on you personally?
A what, sorry?
A book or a film that's had a big impact on you personally?
Actually, the literal answer to that is a silly answer, but when I was a kid, I had a book about some explorers in the jungle, and every morning they would tap their boots upside down to make sure there were no scorpions hiding in them.
Yeah.
And I was so impressed by that, even though the chances of having scorpions in Birmingham was very small.
Quite small, yeah.
I did that, and I still do that now. So that book has made me do something every single day for the rest of my life. So I would say that book has literally had the biggest impact.
Do you remember what it was called?
I do not. I have no idea. All I remember is that fragment. I've been so impressed. Wow. Yeah, you don't want to put your foot in a boot that has a scorpion in it.
It's probably quite a good motto for life. Watch out for the scorpions.
Yeah,
every
it is.
day.
Don't be too worried, but take sensible precautions.
So talking about Jack Reacher, because you literally have such passionate fans. They just love you. And you must love your fans.
Oh, absolutely. I love them all. Yeah.
So tell us about your latest blockbuster, Past Tense.
Well,
So Jack Reacher's on the quest to find his father's past. Is this sort of new territory for Reacher?
well, like we said earlier, I don't make a plan. It's not like I sit down and say, okay, this book is going to be about such and such a thing. But I just sit down and I try and write a good opening, even if it's just one line or one paragraph. And then, so I did that in this book, and I mentioned two things in the first line, and I don't know why, because like I say, I just do it. I mentioned that he'd spent the end of the summer in Maine, and then he was going to head south to stay warm through the winter, like the birds in the sky migrating south also.
Yeah.
And so I wrote that and I thought, good, that's a good opening. Now what does it mean? And the idea, two things. First of all, the birds in the sky. Earlier, in an earlier book, I had mentioned as a sort of humanizing factor that Reacher's dad was a bird watcher. So I thought, oh, I've written about birds there, so maybe this book is going to be about Reacher's dad. And then I had also mentioned Maine, and my friend Stephen King lives in Maine. So I thought, could I do a Stephen King kind of strand in this book, maybe involving somebody else, so that we've got two stories. We've got a sort of creepy Stephen King type of strand, and we've got Reacher looking for his dad type of strand, and obviously they're going to meet towards the end of the book. So that was the genesis of it, and then it's just a question of keeping that going. And I imagined that Reacher would probably get involved quite early to help out these people in the creepy strand, but they were actually doing fine by themselves. They were doing pretty good, so I just let them, in a way they took over the book. I just let them do what they needed, and it wasn't until pretty much the very end that they needed help from Reacher.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, you mentioned, my friend Stephen King. You know, what's it like when the two of you, two of the biggest selling writers in the world sort of get together and just have your normal friendship? What's that like?
It's amazing, and that's all part of the surreal experience, because obviously Stephen's been around forever and I've read him for years, and the idea that, we go to the baseball game together or something like that.
Yeah, and watch the Yankees or something.
Well, he's a Red Sox fan.
Oh, I
and
see.
And that is, the Yankees and the Red Sox are the most bitter rivals.
Yeah. Oh.
So
But you're still friends though.
Yeah, we are, but friendship is tested on those evenings, that's for sure.
It's over that, not over books.
Oh,
they're
yeah,
really
yeah,
selling
yeah.
more.
No, every writer that you meet is a huge reader, and so
Yeah.
that's generally speaking what you can talk about, and he'll email me or call me and say, this is a great book, and have you read anything great? And I'll tell him what I've read and so on. All writers just at heart are readers, and we just love to find somebody new or great.
Yeah. So with Jack Reacher, I think it's fascinating that we kind of don't still know that much about him. Like, his mother was French. We know his favourite president was Harry Truman. We know he's kind of looking out to help people. But, we don't know very much about him. Is that one of the reasons why people love him so much? Because he's mysterious?
I think so, and also because that's sort of realistic. That's like real life, that you can have very close friends. And, I mean, even for past tense, I guess one of the inspirations was that my own dad had died fairly recently, and I was sort of ruminating a little bit. Obviously, he's my dad. I've known him all my life, by definition, but how closely did I really know him? There must be secrets in his life that nobody knew. Do we know anybody 100%? And the answer to that is no. If you have a friend or even a partner, you find things out slowly. It's not like you go on a first date and spend 12 hours reciting your entire biography. We do find out about each other quite slowly.
Well, you forget things that happened in your life as well sometimes.
You do, or you misremember them, and I do that all the time. I have very clear memories of something happening, and then I think, wait a minute, that can't be right, because we didn't live in that house yet, So memory's faulty and memory's selective, and people conceal things, or they're shy about things, especially, I think, our parents' generation that were in World War II. That there are things that they experienced that they didn't talk about afterward.
Yeah. I mean, Jack finds himself in all sorts of impossible situations. Like, I remember once he was trapped inside a storage bunker in South Dakota, hundreds of meters below ground, while there was explosions going on around him, and somehow he survived. Like, what's the most dangerous situation you think he's ever found himself in?
I think it's in the second book where he's in a cave, and he sees that there's a passageway in the back of the cave that's obviously going to lead somewhere significant. So he goes down it, but it gets narrower and narrower and narrower until it's just a tiny crack in the rock, and he's basically stuck And that is my particular horror, is to be claustrophobia, not like getting in an elevator or something. I mean, that's fine, but the idea of being jammed somewhere where you can't actually move, that is a horror of mine. So I wrote that, and it freaked me out, and it freaked out a lot of readers too.
And like Reacher usually at the end of the book sort of slips off down another lonely highway. You know, do you think he'll ever find happiness?
I hope so, and that is the central emotional tension inside Reacher, I think, is that he loves his solitude, but he worries about being lonely. And it's not his fault that he's left alone all the time, because he usually in most of the books, he hooks up with a woman, and they investigate together or something, and they have a brief transient relationship. But the sort of woman that Reacher really likes is a smart, strong, intelligent woman. And the problem with that is the more intelligent the woman, the quicker she figures it out that this is great for a couple of days, but it is not a long-term prospect. And so it's usually the woman that leaves, leaving Reacher alone. And like I say, he worries about that. And so I would love him to find happiness, but that probably would be the end of the series. You know, if he settled down, bought a little house somewhere, got a dog, that would be the end of the series, wouldn't it?
And would you describe yourself as generally happy in life? Like, what brings you happiness?
I'm very happy in life, because I'm fulfilling what I've always wanted to do, which is I'm making other people happy. If I can do that. And books are so lovely in as much as nobody has to buy a book. It's not like you're selling headache medicine or something. Nobody buys it out of distress. Nobody buys it in a bad situation. They buy it because they enjoy reading. And so it's all happy. It's all above the line. And so I'm participating in a thing that makes people happy. I'm not earning money out of misery, which I think a lot of people do, and I don't know how that would feel.
Yeah.
If you're a lawyer and you're making a living by dealing with people who are getting divorced and so on, that must be a miserable experience.
And what do you, because you have been very successful, like what do you sort of do to treat yourself? Like what's your biggest indulgence?
Well, it's really, it's an odd thing, because for most writers, success comes pretty late in life. Like we said, I started when I was 40, and by the time I was, had any kind of real tangible success, I was, 50 odd. And by that point, you are who you are. Your personality is fixed. Your tastes are fixed. What it achieves for you is that you realize that beforehand, you always have a slight worry. You're sort of worried about what bills the postman is going to bring that day. You're sort of worried, have you got enough money to get through the next month? Everybody understands that, I think. And then when you get some money, that goes away. You don't worry anymore. So I don't really buy myself anything in particular. Clothes-wise, I dress really cheap. I wear cheap rubbish, and because I'm not interested in that kind of thing. So I just spend what I need to spend, and then I give the rest away. And that really makes me happy, because you can help people in ways that just change their lives, especially education. I like to do educational scholarships, because there are so many people that if they get an education, maybe if they go to college, it absolutely radically transforms their life. And of course, if they can't afford it, that is a miserable experience for them. They know what they want to do, but they just can't afford it. So I like to help them.
Is that why you keep writing, even though you could retire now and not have to?
Partly that, but also partly for the readers. It used to be a financial contract that I needed to make a living at the very start. Now it's an emotional contract. The reader loves this guy. The reader wants more stories. And so I feel like I'm sort of duty-bound to provide them.
Yeah. And what's the sort of most unusual fan request you've had? Have you had anyone sort of pop out to try and surprise you to meet you or anything like that?
Oh, there's lots. I mean, what really has, the most surprising thing I think is, naturally we get asked to contribute to charity things. And one of the things that is always a big feature in a writer's life is charity auctions of some kind. And what can you actually give, a signed first edition or something. But then somebody had the idea that what you could do is auction off the right to have your name as a character in the book.
Yeah.
And, this does not go to us, it's on behalf of a charity,
Yeah, of
so it's
course.
great. And some people pay an absolute fortune to have
Wow.
their name in the book, or else the name of their mother or friend
Yeah.
or something in the
Yeah.
book. And that's a lovely thing too. So actually quite a few names in past tense
Oh.
are charity winners.
Oh, that's wonderful. And look, Jack's such a mysterious character. What's he going to do next?
Well, I know what he's going to do for the first third of next year's book, because I've already written that far. How it's going to end up, I do not know. And it's like real life. You don't know what's going to happen next. You just have to keep your fingers crossed and hope for the best.
So you can't even give us any secrets because you just don't know what's going to
I
happen.
don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what the book's about until I finished it.
And with the TV series that you're going to do when it eventually happens, are you going to try and do another cameo? Because it was
Oh,
great
sure.
fun when you did the Alfred Hitchcock style cameos in the 2 Jack Reacher movies.
I'm going to I'm going to try and be in every season, and also maybe we'll try and get some readers in as well. That would be fun if there's a scene in a bar or something. Maybe all the patrons can be readers.
Yeah. And I was interested to read about that Lee Child is not the name that you were born
Right.
with. Tell us a story about how you came up with that name.
Well, I've always, I've been, like I said, I've theatre and then television and so on. I've always been in what you could loosely call showbiz, and it's very common for people to use pseudonyms.
Yeah.
And I've had to many times if I wanted to do something in a moonlighting sense. I've always had to invent aliases in order to get around contracts and stuff
Yeah.
like that. And so it was natural to me to take a new name when I changed the career, new name. And Lee Child came from, it's an old sentimental family thing from years ago that started out on a train in America where we'd seen a Broadway show. We were going home to my wife's parents who lived a little bit outside the city. And that last train home is always crowded, so we weren't able to sit
Yeah.
together. I was sitting with a stranger who started talking to me. And when I answered, he noticed that my accent was foreign. And he said to me, "I've got a European car."
Yeah.
And I said, "Really? What car have you got?" And then back then, this was in the 1970s, back then Renault of France sold cars in America. They no longer do, but they did back then. And the little car that in Europe was called the Renault 5, the little compact hatchback. In America, they marketed it as Le Car in order to give it a kind of Parisian chic. But he mispronounced it. I said, "What car have you got?" He said, "I've got Lee Car." And so and it's a universal truth that in all writers' households there's endless wordplay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we immediately started calling everything Lee this and Lee that. And so when our kid was born, she was Lee Baby. And then when she grew up a little bit, she was Lee Child. And so when I decided to use a pseudonym for the writing, I thought that's a great one because quite apart from, it's fun for us as a private joke, it was a smart tactic because it comes early in the alphabet. And people browse in a bookstore from left to right and they get bored and fatigued pretty quick. And so if you're there towards the beginning of the alphabet, you do much better.
And is it true that a lot of best-selling authors have last names starting with a C?
It was at the time, yeah, because I checked it out, and a huge number, and I think it's still kind of true. In fact, I told this story just the other night at the publishers' dinner, and the publishers have a lot of analysts working, so immediately this analyst went away to check the situation right now. And right now, what did he find out? You got a sort of, it's more than 8 times more likely you'll be a bestseller starting with C than with many, many other letters.
That's crazy.
It is crazy.
That's insane.
It is, but you can see how, in a way, can't you?
And what's the thing you're most excited about?
About next year? I've learned not to predict things, something great will happen next year, no doubt, and the new book, there'll be a new book next autumn, and something fun will happen, I'm sure. Maybe involving music, because I also released a music album.
I listened to it. It's great fun.
Yeah,
I saw the
really,
video.
it was
It's
really,
great.
really fun. And I wrote the lyrics, and my musician friends did the music, and I would sort of love to do a bit more of that.
Yeah. So would that be your New Year's resolution, or do you not make them?
No, I never make a New Year's resolution.
And how has your success sort of impacted your family?
Actually, that's a really interesting part of it because, again, the success came late in life, and I'd already been married for a very long time, and my wife knew me, for what I was before, and so for her, it's not a big deal. She's not it's like it's not changed
She's
me
just
at
like,
all.
oh, it's just you.
Oh yeah,
it's you. Old
just
news.
just my husband and my daughter. My daughter was, she was 15 when I started, and, that was that sort of glorious age where she just assumes, oh, Dad'll fix it, Dad'll be all right.
Yeah.
And so there was never any tension in it for her. She just assumed it would work.
Yeah.
And to me, oh, Dad, she's just as contemptuous of a dad as most kids are, yeah.
And what's the question that most fans ask you when they get the chance?
Well, for the past many years, it's been about why did I choose Tom Cruise? And for, generally speaking, it is where do I get the ideas? Which is really an interesting question from a writer's point of view, because actually that's the one thing that separates a writer from a non-writer. Ideas are easy to get. Every day brings you 10 ideas. It's not a question of where do you get the ideas, it's how do you choose these 1 or 2 or 3 ideas out of hundreds? How do you select them to go into a book? That is the challenge, because there are ideas everywhere. Read the newspaper this morning, you're going to get 10 ideas. But what you got to pick 2 or 3 that are going to work really well together, and also work next year when the book comes out. Still be interesting next year. That's the art of it: is selecting the ideas, not finding them.
And you've met so many interesting people. Who's the one person you haven't met that you'd love to still?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question, isn't it? Who would I love to meet? I don't know. I mean, I like the randomness of it. Bill Clinton loves the books. Obama never read them. And what was really interesting to me about that, he was courageous enough to admit that, which is very unlike a politician, because most politicians will fudge it. They'll pretend to have read it to be polite.
Yeah.
But Obama said to me, I'm sorry, I've never read them. I'm too busy.
Bit busy running the country.
And I'm saying, yeah, I'm sure you are.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us, Lee. It's just
Real
been
pleasure,
wonderful.
real pleasure.
We love your books, huge fans.
Well, thank you so much, and I equally love the Reader's Digest.
Thank you so much.